Yep, tight enough where it doesn't come off, and yeah, loose enough where you can index the gas tube with the whatever notch you have. I don't know if you do arrow or whatever, but or Aero Precision, they have like the little notches cut off in the barrel nut, and it's slightly oversized for one of their systems. But um, I don't know, man. It's a ton of fun. I guess with that segue though, um, everyone, this is Fresh, and I'm here with the one and only Jay Burton. How are you doing, Jay?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, man. Thank you for bearing with me. It was somewhat difficult to schedule this, and I was thinking back on that. I've said that with enough people that I think that the problem is on my end. You know how everyone's like, if every driver you encounter is a jerk, it's probably not them. I think if every podcast that you go on is a disaster to schedule, it's probably your fault. So thanks for bearing with me, man.
Oh, it's all good, man. I know I went on your show and I had a lot of fun over there. I was holding back a bit because the nature of the particular space, but it was a real fun opportunity to be on your show as well. And I hope here that I can return the favor and maybe have a little casual conversation of what I like to call the dark arts of that particular space, maybe separated a little bit from certain things.
No,
Um,
definitely. And see, there's a problem, which is that there are two things which you should never, ever mix on the internet. And that is, shall we say, non-traditional politics and firearms. And the problem is, if you were like, hey, rank order your favorite two things to talk about, it's like, yeah, non-traditional politics and firearms. And so, obviously, like, yeah, and I should say this, like, you and I both are not exact, like, we're not by any means like the kind of people the government should be worried about, right? Like, obviously, I say that both, in a legal sense and also just like, not dangerous people. But at the same time, you're like, you know what? There's certain things where it's like, you know what? I'm interested in this. I'm just not going to talk about it because it sounds really suspicious and on the internet. Tell me more about the guns you own, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's that interaction effect is usually not allowed to exist, or it sets off little alarms, which is why I think we're just gonna stick to. So we're gonna stick to the fun stuff here a little bit. But before we do that, just tell us if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do for fun, and maybe how you got into firearms in the first place as well.
Well, yeah, sure thing. I mean, I'm in a kind of a semi-rural area, in a smallish city, right? So very quickly you can be out in the middle of nowhere. And I grew up around, shall we say, like functional firearms. Where it's kind of like, well, you always just have a shotgun around, just sitting there, because like I don't know, if there's like something that needs to be shot, you shoot it, right? And my first gun I was ever given, right, is the same, and this is probably similar to a number of people my age. It's the Dick's Sporting Goods special 24-inch single shot 22 break action with a swappable barrel to 22 long rifle, right? Basically means just the world's worst shotgun ever. But my grandparents were like, yeah, whatever, kid. And I just run around in the woods with that thing. And then that was one side of my family. And the other one, my grandpa is kind of a shall we say, like a kind of like a classic, like blue collar guy, right? He worked as a mechanic, and so he was very much into to gun culture, right? But he was, classic baby boomer. So I grew up on baby boomer guns, which basically means I grew up with the world's largest Ruger P Series collection, a lot of odd 22s, and then cowboy guns. And so that's sort of shaped my taste going forward.
Nice. And up to today, um, can you name, and you could choose whether or not you want to do this as well, but probably three, and they could be theoretical, whether you allegedly own them or would even want to theoretically, would be kind of the, top three of the utility but dream guns, you could say, that um, you either have or could imagine having for fun. I know that's kind of a silly question, but that would help
Yeah, no,
steer
no.
into the
So I
conversation
actually
a little.
don't. I don't personally have a huge collection because I'm kind of at the due to some economic factors, right? Like after college, I was basically, even though I had a traditionally like high earning degree, basically I entered, when I entered the job market, the economy was at what is traditionally called a bad vibes zone. And so my entire industry basically froze hiring. And so I got out of school and it was like, oh shoot, like I have no money. Guess I'm gonna go work in a factory. And so I did that for a while, and just kind of like finally, getting out of the hole there. And so I don't have a massive, collection by any means, but I will say, what, I'll go through the kind of three, shall we say, significant guns that I've bought for myself, right? The first one is because I turned 21 during the summer of love, right, during 2020, which means that there was no guns to be found anywhere, and there was absolutely nothing that you could actually, conceal carry, right? So I had been, given, handguns, but they were huge, right? It was things that you could never actually like functionally use. Uh, and so I was basically like, well, shoot, like what can I actually buy? And JG, I think it's JG Importers or JG Enterprises, right? Is one of these like great boomer sites. Had a bunch of surplus CZ82s, right? Which for those who don't know, it's a kind of a very fancy Czech Makarov. So very similar straight blowback, but it has a bunch of cool features, like it has a cold hammer forged, polygonal rifled fixed barrel. So they're actually like really accurate. And it has some cool features, like it's actually fully ambi. It has a really like a exceptionally good trigger. Now the downside is it weighs a ton and it shoots 9x18 and it's straight blowback. And most of them were not treated; they were like painted. So the finish on them is awful. But I was like, okay, well, they're $250. That's the only gun, literally the only gun available, right? That isn't like a Sky or something like that I could fit inside my belt. And yeah, I bought that thing. I completely like stripped the finish off it, blued it, and it's like, look, is it a great gun? No. Is it a very, very good gun for $250? Yes. And it's surprisingly accurate. It did what it needed to do. It's the only, and I will not necessarily get into the story on this, it's the only gun I've ever used in a defensive setting, and it worked. So good job. Glad I had it. And because again, I grew up on Ruger P series. I grew up on kind of double single action guns. I guess I think that's single action. No, it's double single action. And again, like I don't mind striker fired guns. It's just not what I learned on. So it's, again, I don't have anything against them. It just wasn't necessarily what I was as comfortable with. And I actually like really liked the gun. Like the ergos on it were surprisingly good. And so the next gun, and what I think might be the last handgun I ever buy, is CZP-01, right? So I was basically looking for something. I was like, okay, 9x18, probably not the best caliber in the world, but I want something that's kind of that like, true compact size, right? 15 round capacity that has a, hammer fired, is concealable, and I want to be able to get a full grip. Like I don't want my pinky to be hanging off the end. And so I went to the gun range and I was looking at, pretty broadly. I was like, oh, maybe I'll get, at the time Walther hadn't come out with the new line that everyone liked, but they still had the M2, the Glock 43X had just come out. So I was kind of looking at, things like that, obviously the Glock 19. And then basically I went to the range just to shoot one day, and a guy had one, and I was like, hey, can I shoot that? He's like, yeah, no problem. And I was like, oh, this thing's great. It's like the perfect size. And it was, the action I was familiar with. And basically, that's kind of what I've had for now almost 2 years. And I just love it. I shoot it all the time. I got a slide milled for a 407K. And the cool thing about it is because the guy who did the milling for me, I think it's Wagner Machine is the company that does it. It's like $100. It's super cheap. And actually did a decent enough job. But they'll mill it so it actually co-witnesses with stock sights, which is nice because it sits really low on the gun. The finish matches up, which I don't care a ton about, but it just looks good. And then other than that, it's like the classic Reddit special of like CZP-01, slim grips, a TLR7, and a Holosun 407, and it slaps. Like there's just no way around it. It's probably the biggest feeling compact I've ever shot. Like it fills your hand like full size. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a gun that I truly love. I will probably. I'm not saying I'm never gonna buy another handgun, but I can't justify buying another one. Like anything after this is effectively luxury, because it does fill that like Glock 19 size of like, yes, I can conceal it. Also, I can slap it on a Safari G code, wear it on like a like a regular like full size like battle belt holster, and it still works fine for that. So yeah, that's probably my second one. And then the third gun that I really like, which I won't show pictures of obviously, but I've shared with you, is my god awful abomination AR-15, my Kermit gun, so named because it is sprayed in solid Arvbo field green, which is basically it's basically Kermit green but matte. Uh, and it's kind of like the Block 2 we have at home.
Yep.
So for a while, and they jacked up the prices because Mark LaRue is, shall we say, a special man. He's an interesting fellow. And for a while, he was running this deal where you could get an upper from him with a lower parts kit and a trigger for like $700. And it was the best. It was literally like one of the best deals as far as kits go. And so I'd had, my first AR. I think I had the Ruger AR 556 because at the time when I bought them, it was in college, and they were like $400. And honestly, it wasn't great. It was basic mil spec AR with a free float barrel, but it was pretty good. It works. I sold it to a friend for exactly what I paid for it. Shot a ton. Fine. It's basically a cheaper and I would argue better version of the MP15. But so I was like, all right, I've shot this for a while. I kind of want something a little bit better. And I basically like saw the brand name. I was like, oh, LaRue, they make like the OBR. They make really high-end stuff. And I knew that I wanted, mid-length gas and a 14.5, right? Because I shot that combo. I like that combo. And that's pretty much all I looked at. And I was like, oh, cool, the LaRue upper, that looks cool, right? Neglected to realize that the reason this barrel is so accurate is because Mark LaRue, in his infinite wisdom, made like a SOCOM Plus profile barrel. That thing is fat, like just a fat barrel, which means it's great. It's super accurate. It no point of impact shift with a suppressor at all, but the thing weighs a ton. The thing weighs so much. And so I sort of I dug myself into a hole, right? And so at first I was, running just a basic red dot, and I liked that, but I was like, you know what, like this is such an accurate barrel, it's such a heavy profile barrel, like it deserves some magnification, right? So then I did, the thing that everyone does, which is you get a Viper PST Gen 2. And I realized, like that's a heavy scope. Like with a mount on it, it basically comes out to like almost 30 ounces, like 28 ounces with a mount on it. And on a barrel that's already heavy, that's like a pig of a rifle. It is just not pleasant to hold, especially because it's so high up on the rifle that it really like messes with how it balances, and that just ruined it. And so after that, somewhat before it became an internet trend, I was like, well, what is a sight that is light, relatively durable, and has some magnification? And basically, I landed on an ACOG, and this was kind of before the ACOG trend kicked off because I've had mine for a while now, and I picked one up. Like, it's like one of those showroom demos, right? So it's perfect, like tritium's bright in it. I think I got it for like, I traded the PST Gen 2 for it and paid $150. So like average that out in your mind, whatever that point is, I got a good deal on it. And basically the only thing that's changed from that setup is a Yankee Hill R2, which is a surprisingly good suppressor, and a adjustable gas block, and then that with like an H2 buffer and a B5 SOP mod stock. And it's like, is it as cool as a Block 2? No. Does it essentially weigh the same, have this basic same feature set? Yeah, pretty much. And so like, I like it. It's an incredibly, because it's such a heavy rifle, even with a lightweight optic, it balances really well with a can, and it's so smooth. And so again, like I'm not an incredible shot, I'm on the East Coast, so I don't have quite the range that you do. But it's very, very easy, even with kind of like underpowered loads, to just like ring steel like 400, 500 yards out. It is an incredibly accurate gun. And that LaRue trigger that's like the MBT2S is astonishingly good for the price. It is just a genuinely amazing two-stage trigger for like $75. They might have gone up a little bit because of COVID, but yeah, and that setup is those are kind of that's probably 99% of what I shoot is really those last two guns, and it's not like fancy. It's not like Instagram cool, but like those two setups, I kind of feel it's like not optimal for anything, but it's pretty good for everything that I do. And yeah, so that's kind of my current three setups. If we're talking about future, who knows? I was just talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, I'll never forgive, I'll never forgive FDR because he won't let me own a full auto MP5 SD. And I just like think about that every night when I go to bed. I'm like how many federal laws would I be willing to violate? And I'm like, wait, I'm not smart enough to build one anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Do a full auto Mac 10 or something like that. I mean, yeah, your Mac 10s and Mac 11 kits, those are sort of get super popular, and they're kind of your they're almost like your bootleg TP9s or TP380s that people have been building with little braces and stuff like that. Granted, that's a whole other legal thing with all the updates happening the last 2 days, but yeah, some guys near me they're starting to build their little, what may become SMGs later. I have no idea what they do with the trigger and stuff like that, but they look like pretty neat rigs. So yeah, an MP5 would be beautiful. Again, in a different universe, perhaps, but we'll see what happens.
Well, definitely. And here's what, and I am interested in guns, but there's a big problem with the gun community, which is the gun community can't recognize something very, very important about guns. And there's like, oh yeah, I own guns to defend myself. I own guns to, for purpose of fighting tyranny. Yeah, that's all cool. Guns are also just fun. Like, guns are neat. And like, not everything necessarily has to be like practical to be worth your time. Like my grandfather, right, is the arch boomer, is really big into black powder conversions, right? So you can get like Italian replicas of old West guns, like Colt Walkers and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. And like get a cylinder, which will let it run, modern like smokeless ammo. And a Walker Colt is in no way practical. Like it's like 13 inches long, it weighs a ton. The ammo's not that hot, but like it's fun. Makes you look cool. You get to like feel like you're a cowboy, and that's like definitely part of it. And obviously, look, like I'm not trying to like denigrate practical shooting. Like if I'll be honest, that's probably the majority of what I do. The guns that I have set up are, set up practically, right? That's not my point. But I do think there's another part where it's like, not everything has to have a purpose, and it's important every once in a while to just like, get out in the woods and shoot at trash with your friends,
I mean, I'm going to walk that back just a tiny bit, especially before some of the points you made there. First of all, we both have had a very similar experience or journey on our 5.56 ARs. The first AR that I had, it was a different one. I'm not going to go into my journey necessarily here, but we've had very similar experience along the lines of, I started with that 1-6 Viper, and I was like, hey, this LPVO thing, it's a little heavy. The 1X is not even that great either. What is this for? I moved to the ACOG, which was very similar, so it's kind of funny. And tying that into that practicality part, right? You kind of had to think of those things, the AR a little bit more as a tool, your PO1 more as a tool, less of as a collector. You enjoy shooting it. There's a recreational aspect, but you train it for a particular purpose that's slightly less fun. One part of the conversation you really ticked the box on here was this rising popularity of kind of a two-gun setup, one sidearm, one long arm, essentially. That's becoming a little bit more prevalent in the tactical community. This downsizing of gear, it's obviously the cost is not going down because not everyone wants to do night vision and plate carriers, battle belts, load-bearing equipment, chest rigs, boots, comms, everything like that. I'm starting to see this rise in popularity of, with especially new gun owners, a full-size pistol of some sort, maybe concealed carry if there's a secondary item, and then you have a 5.56 rifle of some sort, usually an AR-15 pattern, sometimes an AK pattern, maybe one of those two, and then something a little bit more recreational. Maybe it's either DMR or an SBR. Usually, that's what I've been seeing. What have you noticed in this particular trend of that's coming through with people, new owners coming. How do you think that culture is going to shift away from, the collector culture we were used to seeing, like in Iraq? I'm going to cite a lot of YouTubers and whatnot, but like your Demolition Ranches, your Iraq Veteran 88s, all these guys that or Siena Arsenal, right? Siena Arsenal, I believe that's the name. You're seeing all these guys that used to collect this stuff. There was the history, but now with the advent of these cultural and political shifts happening, firearms are becoming more of a utility now. What do you think about that coming up? What do you think in the future the gun culture is going to start looking like, with the economic situation, the political situation, and then this kind of new shift in and with gear in particular and how people are buying it?
So yeah, there are several things, which is one, we're on kind of like gun culture, I would almost say like 4.0. We could go into, the different versions of gun culture. Like, you've ever talked to, especially like very old people, I'm talking like silent generation.
Yeah.
They don't really think of guns in the same way we do. And part of that is, to be honest, through much of their lives, like, guns were not, like, you could go to Sears Roebuck and leave with a shotgun.
Or machine gun at the time.
Right, exactly. And to be honest, a lot of American gun culture kind of has to do with a shift due to, shall we say, like, kind of like rising crime in, the post 60s, right? Where suddenly this idea of like armed self-defense became more of a thing. And this is a big reason, right, that even though gun culture was kind of alive and well, like, even in conservative states, there's the idea of like concealed carrying a pistol was unheard of, right? It was something that like gangsters did. And that is kind of a newer, and in broad strokes, kind of a newer development, right? So that's one. Then we have kind of what I consider like baby boomer gun culture. And basically, I think what happened is that there are a group of people who have a very different relationship to the state and regulation than kind of gun culture 3.0 and 4.0, right? I would argue gun 3.0 is that kind of early internet stuff. Like, I consider like Demolition, I can't remember the guy's name. There's, but that kind of like early YouTube. And then I think we're kind of in a different era, like the era of social media now, but that's, neither here nor there. But I think basically what happened is that for a while, it was kind of very much like everyone wanted to be, you could almost say like above board, right? So obviously, like, when you think of baby boomer gun culture, a lot of it's in things like extremely expensive, like side-by-side shotguns.
Yep.
Things like that are in no way like threatening, really. They're not like aggressive necessarily. Things like, iterating many times on a collectible action, like, commemorative 9/11s, things like that, right? Which are obviously like, that's more practical than a double barrel, shall we say, but it's still like it's primarily a collector's piece. And I think that probably also has to do with different levels of disposable income, that it is, you don't have to be as practical when you have a lot of money, and I think what happened basically is that gun culture became a lot more politicized in the 90s, right? And that there are kind of two vectors through that. One of them is like the militia movement. The other one is basically like the Clinton regime kind of going hard against gun culture, the militia movement, and things like that. And that, I think, politicized guns a lot more. And so what you saw, right, is obviously the assault weapons ban, which really affected things. Where basically, and you almost still find these people, right, who are kind of still living in the world like it's, like it's 1998, And I think that a lot of people are of a certain generation are kind of stuck in that mentality of like, oh, well, I don't want to do anything to antagonize, the decision makers, right? Like, so I'll buy a Mini 14, right? Because that's a safe rifle. And again, there's nothing wrong with Mini 14. My grandfather has one. I think it's really fun to shoot. But I think that basically the mentality changed from being like, well, I don't want to get in trouble, to basically like, screw you, I do what I want. And obviously that's not necessarily true in every application. That's not like, obviously, people, when the pistol brace thing came through, there were a lot of people who, destroyed theirs, who registered theirs. And I should say I've never owned a pistol brace, right? So please don't knock on my door, Mr. ATF. But I think that the mentality changed as it became more nakedly political, if that makes sense. And I think on both ends, like genuinely, I think there's not a single person in America whose opinion has been changed on guns in the last 2 years. Like, I just don't see it happening. And so, sorry, the long story short is I think what happened too is with baby boomer gun culture is they didn't really pass it on very well. And so it kind of died naturally. Like there aren't that many people, and I may be, an exception because my grandfather was interested in telling me, but there's a lot of good old boys who go out hunting, and I say this as a hunter, have their special spot, have their land, and don't share it with anyone. And so in a weird way, the culture didn't pass on. And I think honestly, what brought it back is what I kind of argue is like gun culture 3.0 is basically a combination of video games and the internet. That someone played Call of Duty is like, oh, I want a SCAR. Can I get a SCAR? Or like, oh, I want a Mark 18. And obviously there's some negatives to that. Like I think the explosion popularity of like horrible tactical Turkish shotguns probably has something to do with that. But I think that there is something to be said for the fact that like, I would almost argue that the current version of gun culture is kind of almost completely separate from that one. It has different assumptions, it has different kind of relationships to the state. And I think that's also what you see a lot in like the 3D2A and the like very confrontational attitude that, for instance, organizations like the FPC have compared to things like the NRA, right? Is that there is a difference in culture. And look, I'm not the harshest on the NRA. They're kind of a useful, they're kind of like a useful target. They're like the cape on the bullfighter. It's like, yeah, sure, be mad at them. Just spend all your energy attacking them, whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is a separate culture. And sorry, from that, I think that's where we see the discrepancy between a more like collector's mindset and a more like practical mindset. I think because they're from a different culture. And so, sorry, the reason I don't want to just rant, I want to actually come back to your question. We're talking about the trend.
Okay.
I think we have to separate, right, the signal from the noise. And the signal would be, what are trends? I think we can definitely say there's a trend that people are going towards magnification, even on smaller guns, right? People are going to optics on everything. People are, you're right, going towards things like, night vision. And then there's the noise. And the noise is, like 11.5s are done, 12.5s are the new hotness. It's LPVOs suck. We like ACOG RMR, or we like 2 to 10. Things like that, right? The kind of like tactical churn of whatever Reddit or TaxSwap or ARPCOM is mad about or happy about. And I don't know, I don't read any of these places. But I do think that broadly, you're right, that there is more and more acceptance of essentially like gear and like other things, right? It's not just like first it was, I own an AR-15 with a 30-round mag. Then it became like, oh, okay, I own one, right, that has like certain features. Then it was like, yeah, you're right. Okay, now I own, like maybe I own like a Condor chest rig. And then I would argue now, at least in the gun community, owning things like body armor, owning things like, radios and night vision is much more normalized. And some of that I think is good. Some of it I think is people spending money that they can't really justify because they never use it. But you know what? That's how the world works, right? So sorry, that was a long rant, man, but thanks for letting me go.
No, all good, man. Yeah, and this is going to be, it's honestly meant to be just a super casual conversation on stuff. So we can branch off in any ways. My various autism and speech impediment may come in, and there'll be little pauses here on my end too. So it's all good. But no, yeah, I'm glad you kind of, took the parachute off that cliff a little bit. There's no right path on how to start in this particular space necessarily. Everyone started kind of from different locations, but they end up converging roughly in the same space. Hey, maybe there's one shotgun, one pistol, one AR, something like that, and all this equipment like you mentioned. I've noticed no matter where everyone starts in particular, there is a bit of a movement from various walks of life, whether it be straight into the practical or out of those FUD hunting rifles, or out of a large collection of milsurps and other antiques into the space. I thought it was kind of interesting, that thing happening. I don't know if it's a necessarily positive trend, but it seems to be, among a long list of things that people are starting to readjust when it comes to their different forms of, let's say, economic or maybe I'll call it kinetic independence. But kinetic independence, I mean, is you have some say in the way that you can counter threats to threat of bodily harm or death or stuff like that. Maybe I'll call it
I
that
know,
way.
definitely. I see what you mean. And I think also, and I know you said you don't want to get into directly political stuff, and I try not to, right, when we're talking about fun stuff. But I think that regardless of your opinions, right, like when I was kind of joking, like, oh yeah, like I couldn't buy a gun in 2020, what I think really is that a lot of people basically saw, like, oh, the kind of standard operating order of things, right, where like things generally work. I can call someone on the phone and they will come defend my property with violence. That was not a 100% guarantee,
That's out the
right?
window in a lot of cases now. Yeah.
Right. And even if you're like, okay, well, that's gone from 100% to like a 95% guarantee, that changes the equation, right? And I know people, right? People I'm close to who basically were like, okay, like I'm taking this seriously, right? Like the guys that I actually train with, the guys that I, run drills with, a lot of them basically came to it at the same time. And they're like, oh, like I want to not only just like, have a double barreled shotgun in under the bed, right? To shoot two blasts in the air, but like, if this is something I might actually have to do, like I'm going to take it seriously. And I've been speaking kind of colloquially and joking around a little bit, but I do think that there is something kind of sobering, right, about the ability to enact violence, right? Where you're like, okay, like I have the capacity to kill someone. Obviously, you should only do that within legally justified settings. Defending yourself, defending others, all those caveats out of the way. But if you've accepted that, you're like, okay, that's something I want to be capable of doing, which I think for a man is a good thing to do. Then it becomes like, okay, well, like if I do that, I'm responsible for that, and that.
Oh, I think you cut off a little bit there. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have little cutoffs here once in a while. Might be connection issues here. Let's see.
Means for other people and your legal well-being, right? And so I think that at least for a lot of people, it's basically like, oh, things can go bad, even in like we're not special anymore. It's not like bad things only happen to other people. Like they can happen here to people who look like me in my country. And so I don't know. I think that was a wake up. I think that there were a lot, and you can look at the stats on this. There are a lot of people who became first time gun owners. Doubtless the vast majority of them, bought a Glock 19 for $950 at a pawn shop, stuck it in a box, and it still sits in their sock drawer to this day, right? But obviously there's a funnel effect, and I think that there were a lot of people who kind of looked around and said, all right, like I might have to take some responsibility for myself, and that's probably a good thing.
I wish before that happened that I stockpiled ammo because with all the shortages,
I've been doing it now, and it hurts so much, man.
Yeah, it almost costs as much as a cheap handgun at this point to get 1,000 rounds now, even locally where it's super cheap it might be, but it's absolutely awful.
Oh, man, tell me about it. It is. We don't just like fetch about this the whole time. It's like I remember, like I am happily paying what used to get me 223 for 9 mil. Like I'm like, oh, this is a great deal.
Yep, that's true. Gone are the days of 15-cent Wolf Gold and 25-cent Winchester White Box. Which, speaking of which, what's kind of your what would you say is your pills of choice on 5.56, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, so here's the thing: is basically I would in the olden days I used to just run like Wolf Steel Case because like, I work off the axiom, if it doesn't run steel, it doesn't deserve brass.
Yeah.
And that used to work great in kind of the pre-existing world, right? Because there was an appreciable, price difference. And after COVID, I started kind of crunching numbers, and I was like, any place that sells steel is basically playing the ammo seek game, which is how cheap can I get this technical price and then slap you with like $100 processing fee or like $100 of shipping or whatever. And then you like average it all out and you're like, wait a minute, this is the same price as like moderately inexpensive brass case 5.56. It's like, why don't I just buy better ammo for technically, for like if you actually add in all the fees, the exact same price anyway. And so basically, I have a few dealers. And generally what happens is I have some what I consider like defensive ammo, which is I still have the most of case of IMI M193, right? Just because it went on sale, it was contract overrun, but it's great. You know, it's incredibly hot. It's pretty, excuse me, it's pretty accurate for 55 grain, and the brass is impeccable, right? So I consider that kind of like the deep stockpile. And then other than that, it's just a couple like I basically will use like SG ammo, Bucking Horse Outpost, and then a few other places that generally run pretty competitive prices, low shipping. And then I just kind of look like, okay, what's available? And so I have a big stock of PPU M193, which is not really M193. It's like Spicy 223. You know, it's kind of in between, but it's burns clean. It's, you know, 2 MOA ammo-ish, right? Which is fine for running drills. And then I have, in addition to that, I have some, which I should have done more research. It turns out their ammo's crap, but it runs fine in mine. You know, your results may vary. Got a bunch of like Ammo Inc., you know, again, 55 grain, 5.56. It's fine. It's not super accurate, but it's good for short range. And then I kind of do the same thing on, you know, 9mm, and those are the two main calibers I shoot because they're the only thing that's, you know, relatively affordable. And then it's kind of one of those things where it's like I just kind of sort by like what's the real cost, right? So adding in all the fees. And I this is not particularly interesting, but look, like I'm an econ guy, I'm a finance guy, and I basically went to school for 4 years to make spreadsheets. So like, you know, I might as well use this for something practical. And saving several cents on a box of 9mm, that seems like a good way to spend an hour of your time, right?
Yeah, it at least gives you the assurance that you've done your due diligence, or as best as you could, before making a rather big purchase that you're now going to lose sleep at overnight while it's coming on the way to
Yeah.
you.
Well, and here's the other thing. It's almost more motivated by spite than anything else. It's like, no, you're not going to get me paid $50 for shipping. Screw you. I'm not doing that. Instead of doing that, I'll spend 2 hours of my own time to find something that's marginally cheaper, right? Just so I don't have to give you my money.
Yeah, I'll violate my time value of money equation in order to spite you and not go over your store.
I may be losing, but you're not winning, right?
Goodness, yeah, just imagine like charging an interest rate just to tell them what it's like. Well, for the money that I lost and the research that I had to do, you send them an invoice for the interest rate for your money or something like that to the manufacturer. And I did not choose you, and I am charging you for that. So the prices are pretty oppressive these days. I mean, there's a couple sites where I've seen that kind of diamond in the rough. Talk about your PPU. Again, I don't know when you bought it, but I actually got some chrono data. And it's actually been pretty close to the super hot Winchester White Box M193. So
that's good.
So if you have a chronograph or someone you can borrow, I think you're going to find it's not very far off the Winchester. So actually that stuff is hot, and you might be fine with it in terms of
great. I
ballistics.
mean, I'll put it this way. Again, one of the many things that I do wrong, but I do anyway, which is if you shoot an ACOG much, right, you'll be familiar with, you know, it's obviously it's a BDC reticle. You don't really dial in it. So essentially what I do is and this is a hack, right, for anyone who, like me, can't get into their Strelok Pro app because of the stupid State Department.
Yeah.
And I'll put it this way. I didn't care about the Russia-Ukraine war until they locked me out of Strelok.
Oh.
And let me tell you now, Russia just wiped the whole country off the map. I don't care. They took my Strelok Pro. Get rid of every single one of them.
Yeah, nothing radicalized me. Nothing radicalized me quite like losing all my BDCs.
Yeah, exactly. Because what I'd do before is I'd like buy a case of ammo, right, and then basically kind of play with the 0 in Strelok Pro, right. So obviously, if it's designed to be zeroed at 100 meters, if your ammo's a little slow, you're gonna have to, you know, push that 0 one way or another until the BDC lines up. But I will say, there's a exact copy of Strelok Pro for sale for $8. It's literally the same app except it's blue instead of the color Strelok is, called Chair Gun Elite. It is literally the same app. They just stole it, but it's based in Italy. And so if you want Strelok Pro, Chair Gun Elite works great. It's literally the same app. but it is not as legally distinct. And so essentially what I do is, and I don't have a chrono, is I would just kind of basically between a combination of like Buffman range reviews on YouTube and like if I could find someone else who'd done chrono data, and then like I'd use that as like close enough, right? If someone else with a 14.5 is getting about that same, for me it's a 4x fixed site, like I'm not doing precision work, and I just plug that velocity in, take the, obviously the load data off the back of the box, plug the velocity in from somewhere on the internet into Strela. And so like I pretty much just zero based on whatever case I'm currently going through, which I realize is probably technically not the smartest thing to do but like it works for me, it's what I do. It's not what I should do, which is probably an important distinction to make, right?
Again, it's the Matthew principle when it comes to stockpiling ammo. Those who have all shall be given. To those who have not, all shall be taken away. Pretty much the best way is to pick what works best in your gun, groups the best, has consistent zero, and then buy 15,000 rounds of it. That seems to be, I think Brassfax said something about that too, and probably Hops does it. Someone as well, and we'll get to those guys in a bit too.
Yeah.
But that might be, that might be the only way to really do it. And probably 15,000 rounds, if you're diligent about it, like a chrome, Cold Hammer Forge chrome line barrel could probably take most of that. So maybe you wouldn't have to adjust too much if you kept the rifle in a rather permanent configuration in that sense. But
well, here is a general principle I kind of work off of, which is essentially the point of diminishing returns, right? Which is obviously, I'm not saying, don't, because like to me, I feel like there are certain things that are worth it and not, right? The juice can be worth the squeeze. And to me, right, like getting a really good zero for your load, that's worth the squeeze, right? Like playing around with, the like whatever reticle you've got to find the zero that lines up for what you need, right? That's kind of worth it. But when it comes to like really specific grouping, to be honest, right, the difference between like a 2 and a 3 MOA load, like just run the math on that, right? Like, okay, so it comes out to how far do you shoot, right? Let's just say that, I shoot, let's just say 500 yards, right? So 3 MOAs at 15 inches, right? Plus or minus.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, like how regularly am I shooting something smaller than 15 inches at 500 yards, right? And at that point, right, I'm using a BDC with no wind holds. You can run the math on how big that point is that you're using to aim, and you're like, okay, like this is not a precision setup. So like running, match ammo, running 77 grains, or whatever OTMs. Like obviously those loads exist for a reason. I probably am going to do, because let's be honest, I bought a match barrel and I'm trying to use it as a general purpose rifle, is I'll probably build another, 14.5, 13.7, throw the ACOG on that and get a, higher mag scope and actually like, use my system to its limits, right? At which point, right, when you're doing, lower round count stuff and you're really pushing the capabilities of 5.56 cartridge, yeah, I would argue, like having a really accurate load that makes sense at that point, right? You need that extra capability. But to be honest, right, I feel like a lot of people get really twisted up over hypotheticals, and I'm like, no, I'm not even fighting you on the specifics. I realize this is not as accurate. However, that doesn't matter. Practically, does not matter, right? Because let's be honest, if you're shooting even like a half-size IPSC, measure that, whatever your MOA load is, you're probably within that, like, what's going to get you more utility, right? The extra ammo you'd shoot if it were 44 cents a round versus 80, for OTMs or whatever, or that like fractional bit of accuracy. And I don't know, I think what happens a lot is that people kind of lose sight of the difference between better and better enough for me to spend money on it, because I think that what we've kind of got to the point is that most optics and most loads are actually pretty good, like it gets there, it's clear enough. And I don't mean to like poo-poo on like nice stuff, right? Like I like shooting through good glass, I'm kind of a glass snob. I'm not going to deny that. But also like, I think people need to kind of take a frank look at what is something you want to buy because you think it's cool, you want to spend your money on, and what's something that you need, quote unquote. And maybe that's the circle back around to something earlier you said. That's the motivation for that desire to slim down the collection to, like, your main squeeze, so to speak.
Right, for sure. It's yeah, onto the point of like your 75 grain OTMs. It's funny you mentioned that because out of a 16-inch or 14.5, 13.7, let's suppose you're doing rifling, so you got like a long muzzle device you pin and weld it, which that's a whole other conversation too. But at that point, the velocity loss that you've had, probably out to 400 or 500 yards, even 55 grain, the amount of velocity that you get, it's actually more forgiving elevation wise in most cases. You don't have to correct as much, even if you have a red dot, if you just pick lighter, cheaper, faster ammo out of a 16 or 18-inch barrel. Yes, you have the accuracy, but you have more environmental factors to contend with because that bullet is in the air a little bit longer due to slightly lower velocity out of, especially a short barrel out of a small caliber like a 22. There's physics and pressures and stuff like that. If anyone has taken engineering, that's why the majority of people in the tactical space stick with 55 and 62 grain 223 or 556 is because within the effective range that a 16-inch carbine, anywhere from like a 10.5 all to a 16-inch or 14.5 carbine, it does well out to those distances. And if you want terminal ballistics, if you want a terminal ballistics advantage, like in a 10.5, you can go, yeah, sure, with your 77 grain OTMs and whatnot. But for the majority of time, a 16-inch or 20-inch with 55 grain is extremely forgiving at distance, and sometimes this is why some of your Marine infantrymen just had regular 20-inch M16s, and they just ran iron sights. They didn't run red dots they didn't know what a red dot was at the time. They couldn't even afford their own aim point comp M4s, M5s, whatever dots were at the time. I might be getting my years mixed up, but because that's the stuff that worked. Was it the most handy? No, but that's what the military made work. It was not always about shooting. This particular discipline is not exactly all about shooting. It's about finding a clever and simple solution to a complex and rugged problem. In particular, that's what ARs and carbines are. And I think over the years, I would dare say most of those boutique AR companies from the early 2000s, it started out as like a fun Predator thud gun. And as people start to see the tactical utility and start to change their mindset over different solutions that people can achieve to a clever, tactical, effective rig that was robust under various conditions experimentally. There's statistical data behind it. I think that's when people start to see the magic of AR-15s. I know we're not giving pistols their due at the moment, and part of me is probably that I just know long guns a little bit better than pistols. We'll get back to those in a sec. But yeah, to everything you said, if you have glass that is decent enough, a aiming system that you are used to, that works best for your line of thinking, your impulse actions in particular, if you have a rather impulsive or behaviors in how you work the rifle, what's quickest for you, what's best long range for you, what works best for your eyes, that should be enough. And everything else is just fiddling around with glass that you might be trying to force your manual arms or force your protocol into, if that makes sense. That's a lot of what I've been seeing on YouTube, and I can say this because I was that person too. I was like, oh, I wanted an LPVO, right? So I'm going to try to change my shooting style to that, and see how it works. I just found it didn't work for me, and that's why I stuck with prisms on this channel for a long time.
Thinking through this, I kind of had I lost you for a little bit. But I think I got your point. Yeah, so I think basically, there's a lot of the sentiment that something's good enough, right? Because a lot of times it's a cope, right? It's I bought something cheap and terrible, and that means it's just as good, and it's not, right? It's obviously not. But I think that there's something to be said for essentially going back to that analogy of signal versus noise, right? Which is, what do you actually do? What do you need to do that? Versus what is an idea that you've been sold on that that would be cool. And look, I'm not immune to this, right? I think things are just as cool. You're talking to someone who has really a completely undeserved love for side by side shotguns. Like they're bad. They're not as good as but they just look good. I like them. They tickle my brain. I'm not gonna lie. It's my autism. I can just take the special interest.
Yes.
And so, like, I'm not denying that. But my point is, and this is I guess the broader thing I'm trying to say is that it's okay if things are just fun. Things are things you just like. But I think that there's a lot of purchase justification, where something is like a cool thing to have. It gives you status. It gives you internet points for having. And then there's the backward justification of, well, I need it because. And I think that you're 100% right about glass, right? Where it's sort of just like, it's like, okay, is this the best at everything? No. Prism sites are a great example of this. But is this probably pretty good at everything you do? Yeah, to be honest. Yeah. And so I don't know. I don't want to come out of this super negative. Like I like guns. I think they're fun. I in addition to being fun, they're also like a very useful skill to have. But I think that it's pretty easy to get burned out on the kind of like consumer cycle of, here's the next really expensive thing you have to buy. Do you see what I'm kind of getting at there?
Well, that's why I probably haven't been uploading as often recently. I've been just looking at constantly at spreadsheets, making them. I'm a bit of a spreadsheet monkey here too, at my job. But yeah, it's easy to just kind of look at the prices, the specs, try to synthesize everything together, run some statistical software, and go like, this is the best optic for you. Cool. And I look at it and like, it doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel like something that gives me confidence in using it. It doesn't inspire me to train all that much either. So it will probably go into the, I'm going to use lifting a little bit here. There is the sentiment that I found lately that's kind of effective sometimes too. Maybe it's a bit of a cope in a way for the regular person, but the exercise that you can enjoy doing consistently without stopping, day in, day out, for the next however many years of your life is more effective than the exercise you're trying to force yourself to do, but you don't really enjoy all that much. I think sometimes that's the same with optics as well. The stuff that you really truly prefer will always trump the optics that are being sold to you supposedly that are a little bit better, but you end up getting caught in all the details a little bit too much, and it's just not as fun. You've lost the point by the time you've put thousands of rounds through and don't feel like you've been satisfied with it.
No, definitely. And like I've been pretty vocal about the fact that I'm interested in fitness, and this is actually an interesting example, right? Because you're 100% right that like almost nothing trumps consistency, and obviously right, and that's kind of applies to any skill set you build. And obviously, I'm not saying like if your quote unquote workout is that you like walk around your block with your phone in your hand every day, and you're like, well, I'm consistent. It's like, okay, that's not what I mean, right? That's kind of an extreme. But there is definitely something to be said for the fact that like, obviously like the rifles can be objectively better or worse. I'm not denying that. But to be honest, right, is a 3 MOA rifle that you're very comfortable with, that you shoot a lot, that is, kind of like effective in your hands. Is that going to serve you better than something that's, more expensive, cooler, and on paper better, right? But doesn't have all kind of like the soft stuff. And I think that obviously, like, I'm not even denying, right, that there are, objectively better or worse choices. Like, look, like you're talking to an ACOG guy, and I could look at paper and be like, yeah, the eye relief sucks. The reticle's restrictive. It's not great, shall we say, like within 50 yards. And it's all true, but I like it. It works. And I think that there is a missing kind of human element to it, right? Which is that, you and I aren't departments. We don't have to standardize something for everyone. We kind of standardize for, what you do, and what you really do. And so I don't know. I think that that's, kind of a useful analogy in it. I'm curious, right? You said that you're kind of more familiar with long guns. Is that just, kind of a virtue of like, or by virtue of like where you live, or are you just not as much of a handgun guy?
Yeah, sure. I suppose I can let's see if how much I can wrap up the story because I know you probably have to go soon. But the way it started for me when I got into firearms was black powder. Actually,
Oh, really? It's an interesting path. Yeah.
I it's and I'll get into the career thing maybe offline with you, but I have
Oh,
this.
yeah, yeah. No worries.
I seem to have this this path where in order to get to a certain part, I have to really start with the basics and learn things at a kind of a deep fundamental level before I get to the good stuff, right? So I started with black powder. You know, I've had like a Kentucky rifle. I had like a modern muzzleloader. I played with smokeless muzzleloaders for a little bit, and played with you know these long barrels, these long stocks, one shot at a time. You know, really taking time and putting a little bit of pressure on myself not to jerk the trigger or do that kind of thing. That's at least the philosophy I had at the time. These days, volume is better, obviously, but that's how I started there. I really loved the westerns. You had your Sharps rifles, your single shots. I got into that for a bit. Um, got into black powder cartridge. I'm a big reloader, you know, so muzzleloading was a natural segue to reloading. Then I got my first Remington 700. It was a 308, and then just it started compounding into PRS and some Milsurp rifles, and eventually the military style stuff ended up being a SIG 308. That was kind of the first of your gas guns, and then it got into this AR space, and that's probably the shortest version I can get into. How I got here in the long guns, and I had some pistols as well, but even then they were fairly long pistols. Like Thompson Center Encore and Contender was like a big one that I used to play with a lot. You know, I'd have like this 45-70 Encore. You know, it would absolutely sprain your thumb after like 10 shots or something.
Yeah,
but
right.
but you know, if I took like a subsonic 405 grain load out of it, you know, put a little pistol scope on it, and took a target at 300 yards, and here like 2-3 seconds later that it'll ding, I was like, oh, okay, this is it's kind of cool. It might have some utility in some way. I liked exploring those weird and wacky spaces, both in the long and short guns. I was kind of in the funny space, but also I talked with J.D. Jones a few times about this stuff, and I just bought and sold a lot of different things, and optics is actually kind of my probably a recent thing that I finally got into. So yeah, with long guns, it was just trying a bunch of different things with a little bit of pistol shooting in between. So I absolutely felt when you started talking about pistols, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna have to like try and keep up here a little bit and get my knowledge. But in either
No,
case,
definitely.
man,
I think that the reason I got more into pistols, right, is that one, that's just what my granddad shot, and for me, long guns were boring, right? Like long guns were big and heavy, had big scopes on them. They shot like every shot was like $2 because it was some like round from the 50s, right? And so I just like never thought they were fun until like kind of later in life in college. But like, oh, pistols, that's like the stuff my grandpa had. That was like I kind of mentioned the Ruger P series. And then also, and I don't know if I've ever told this story, is that I was in a pretty bad dog attack, and it like scared me, like genuinely scared me. I got attacked by a pit bull, and I basically had this thought of like, oh, I was like I was, if that had gone differently, like I would have just died, And I was lucky I didn't get hurt too bad, but I kind of had that like, oh, like I had nothing on me, to defend myself, and so that's kind of why I started, I started carrying, and then I had that, that second run in basically where, a guy attacked me, and I showed him my collection of firearms, and then he left, stopped harassing me, right? And so that was one of those things where it was basically like, oh, like this is something I want to do, right? Like this, I needed it once, I never wanted to need it again. And so like, look, like I'm not claiming to be some type of like, like John Wick, like super cool guy. But it was kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, like this is something that like is useful. This has mattered at least twice in my relatively short life. And so that's what got me into kind of concealed carrying, right? Because then it was like, well, I need a gun. Got the CZ, and like, oh, this thing kind of sucks. I like it, but let's be honest, it's heavy. And then it's kind of that same process, like, well, what like works for me, And I don't know. Sorry, I could talk about guns all day, but I think that, for me at least, like it was almost like I had to learn that long guns could be something other than like, a 12-pound Remington 700, with a bull barrel, right?
Yeah, the first time you hold a sub 10-pound 16-inch carbine in your hand is when you start to kind of realize, hey, this makes sense. This starts to become a practical, purpose-built, lightweight, and handy arm, and that's why people go for short barrel rifles as well, and we're going to see the future of those. But yeah, I think that particular space has really redefined the role of the long gun for, I don't like using this word, but the average consumer, and I'm really hoping to see a very healthy expansion of that space over time, as well as an absolute flourishing in different gear for the sidearm, because sometimes the sidearm really doesn't get enough love. Sometimes in these spaces, there's the two different philosophies, and I'll probably find a way to wrap up here, but um, you had your one particular philosophy of, hey, the long gun is there, your your sidearm is there to eventually get to your long gun, right? That's a philosophy that I've seen in military circles and sometimes in video games. But sometimes you don't get enough love in, hey, the intimidation factor of having an AR-15 and an AK SCAR or something like that. Sometimes is how you get back to base for your close quarters combat for a pistol. And sometimes a pistol is the thing you're going to have on you in your day-to-day life as well. And I think finding a middle ground in synthesizing those two philosophies is what's going to really make that space an incredible wealth of knowledge and fieldcraft. So, Jay, where can my viewers find you?
Oh yeah, definitely. And thanks for letting me just rant at you for an hour straight.
Dude, I love it.
Appreciate it. You're very you're a very generous host. But I have my own show, the Jay Burton Show, where I only very rarely talk about guns, but I also talk about politics, history, philosophy. I've had our very gracious host on. I've also had Delta 34, you may know from making very good videos about ACOGs on the internet. I've had Intrepid Tactics. So some people kind of connected to our spheres, but certainly kind of dealing with the same ideas you've kind of heard mentioned in this. And the Jay Burton Show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Odyssey, pretty much wherever you find normal podcasts. And if you check that out, I appreciate it, because I really do enjoy podcasting, and I'm genuinely honored you want me on. And this was fun. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, man. It's been an honor to connect with you. And for all you guys out there, I'll see you on the range.